So welcome to everyone. This is a presentation on the health of the Saxtons River watershed and a chance for you to learn about issues going on in the watershed as well as the tactical basin planning process. And we would like to end this program by hearing from all of you because as Marie is going to talk about, that this is a chance for all of our communities to have input in the future of our river and the projects and protections that we want to see going forward for the river and the whole watershed. So my name is Margot Gia. I'm the Natural Resources Planner at Windham Regional Commission, and I work and I'm one of the steering committee members of the Saxtons River Watershed Collaborative. The Saxtons River Watershed Collaborative was one of the first watershed collaboratives that was developed in the state of Vermont. And the idea behind it was to look at issues that on a watershed-wide scale. So often, in towns and municipalities, we look at river issues based on what's happening right in our own communities, whether we're with a conservation commission or the planning boards or the select boards. We're often thinking about water as it runs through our community. But as we all know, that we are connected by our waterways, and all of our communities share what's happening upstream and downstream. And all of those issues work together to form the health of our region's waterways and what's happening in our individual communities. And whether you're at the headwaters, such as Windham, who are where most of the headwaters for the Saxtons River is, or whether you're down in Westminster or Rockingham, where the mouth of the Saxtons River is, the issues may seem very different. But again, they are all connected because no matter what happens upstream, it's going to be downstream. So we're very lucky this evening, the Saxtons River Watershed Collaborative. I should mention that we are an open collaborative. It is made up of organizational representatives, citizens from each of our communities, as well as representatives from conservation commissions and select boards. We're open and interested in having people join us, and in our work, we're trying to the group has been on a little bit of hiatus in the last year, but we are trying to reinvigorate and join back together so that we can be looking at the health of our river from a whole watershed-wide perspective and working together as communities instead of in isolation. And so this program is really sort of the first look at sort of this new start to the Saxtons River Watershed Collaborative. And we're very lucky to have with us tonight our watershed planner, she's going to talk about the region that she covers, but she works for the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, and she covers all of the waterways that are in sort of southeastern Vermont. And so we're lucky that she's going to be talking with us tonight about what is the Tactical Basin Plan? What does it mean for those of us that live and work in this watershed? And then after her presentation, we'll have a chance to ask questions, and we really want to hear from all of you about what your concerns or areas of interest are for this watershed, because that's what's going to drive the future of the planning for this region. So Marie, I'm going to let you take it over.
Thanks, Margot, and thanks for showing up to this. I appreciate it. And as Margot said, I need your input. That's part of what this whole planning process is to find out what the community really wants to have happen along their rivers and on their rivers and what they want them to be like. So I hope you will feed me that information. As Margot said, I work for the Department of Environmental Conservation from something called the Water Investment Division. And my job is called Watershed Coordinator. So I put together these water quality plans. What I'm going to do is show a PowerPoint presentation, and just as explanation, I tried to use as few words as possible. Some slides are somewhat wordy, but ADA requirements on public presentations over the internet, I have to read the slides to you. So I will do that as quickly and concisely as possible. And if you have a question about a specific slide, hopefully, I tried to use mostly maps to do this presentation. So if you have a question or something about the specific map or the slide itself, please go ahead and ask it or type it into the chat. Margot's going to monitor the chat for us. But if it's kind of more of a general question and you can wait till the end, you can either type it in the chat or if you could just hold that till the end. I don't have a ton of slides, but I think it'd be easier if I can get through them and then we can have a deeper conversation. So as long as all this continues to work, and let me know if you can see the tactical basin planning slide. Yes, okay, great. So as I said, I'll go through this. So my job is to write water quality management plans, and the one that I am working on right now is the Tactical Basin Plan for the West Williams and Saxtons Rivers, and all these little brooks that flow to the Connecticut River directly, which are Cobb, Mill, Fulham, Chase, East Putney, Sackett's Canoe, Salmon, and Crosby Brooks. And this also covers the 24 miles of the Connecticut River itself from Herrick's Cove in Rockingham to the Brattleboro Retreat Meadows, where the west comes in. So between the mouths of those two rivers, this plan will cover that as well. Now let's see if I can do this. Hey. So we do this across the state. This is a mandated legislative requirement that we create basin plans as well as a federal requirement. So we have 15 planning basins around the state. I think you can see my cursor, correct? Nod? Yes, thank you, Margot. So I cover this portion of kind of the southeastern quadrant of the state. And this basin plan is for the West Williams and Saxtons watersheds. 15 plans, 5 basin planners. We go around and do this repeated every 5 years. And we do monitoring, assessment, planning, and then implementation of those plans. So what we do with tactical basin plans is we take all the water quality information that we have gathered in the monitoring first year phase of the process, and then we assess that information, figure out what it is telling us, and then I step in and start writing the plans to lay out specific goals, strategies, actions that will protect and improve surface waters. And then we move into a public phase where this will come back once the plan is written in draft for further comment and input from the public. And then we'll spend the next 4 or 5 years implementing that plan. And my job is to help guide the funding for implementing the on-the-ground projects for restoration and protection. Hopefully everyone knows where this is. That's Twin Falls. So we try to answer several questions throughout the basin plan, and kind of what is the water quality and habitat conditions now? What needs to be done to improve those conditions and protect water quality? What are the strategies that can be implemented to address those problems? And once we've identified the problems, who do we work with? Who are the potential partners and the funding sources? And then what are the management goals for the waters? And management goals is basically an EPA term that is what are the hopes? What do we want these waters to be used for? What do we want them kind of out in the future? What do we want them to be like? And we do this as I do the tactical basin plan. we develop strategies to address water quality by what we call land use sector. And those sectors are agriculture, and then we also focus on developed lands, both for stormwater and for road runoff and road erosion issues. We deal with wastewater discharges and lots of focus on natural resource restoration projects. So in a very, very tight nutshell, that is what basin planning is. And if anyone has any questions on that, please go for it, and I'll answer those, and then we'll move into Saxtons River specific information. Anything?
There's not currently anything in the chat.
Okay. So we'll move right into kind of Saxtons River specifics. What I've been doing is, in this phase, is gathering the information that we have from the monitoring and from the assessment work that's been done to see what it's telling us, so that as I start drafting the text part of the plan, I know what I've got to say. So hopefully you all know exactly where the Saxtons River is. This is the whole Basin 11 here. Saxtons River, as Margot said, starting up on Glebe Mountain in Windham, main stem coming through Grafton, Rockingham, and out into Westminster. Athens is part of it with tributaries, a little bit of it in Townsend on the south branch of the Saxtons. And then I can do this, right where it comes out by Bellows Falls. And this is the very mouth of the Saxtons. Under the Route 5 bridge was the Blake Higgins Dam. And that's what it looked like in the 50s. And the lower shot is what it looks like now. So that's a very well breached dam, but still having some impacts. Fish can't necessarily get up there and through that. So we're still working on that issue. This is a big chart about what we know about the water quality. So we do biological monitoring, which is fish community and the bugs that live in the river. And we look at that and it shows us all the red bars. This is the entire Basin 11, that all the red bars mean that we have good to excellent conditions in the majority of our rivers that fully support the uses of swimming, boating, fishing, aquatic biota, habitat, aesthetics, drinking water supply, and irrigation. And when I say drinking water supply, that does not mean you can go drink the Saxtons River. That means that with treatment, this water can be used for drinking water supply. This is, well, there it is. So the upper Saxtons River is basically Grafton Village upstream, so into Windham and up to Glebe. And then the lower Saxtons River is kind of Grafton Village down to Westminster. So the upper Saxton is in excellent condition. We have lots of monitoring data that tells us that. The lower Saxtons, however, does have some issues. The mouth up to the Saxtons River Village wastewater treatment plant, there is phosphorus in that portion of the river, which is stressing the river. And then it also has poor riparian condition. The channel has been modified. We need some extra fish data because there's something that's not quite right there. And the pollutants that are impacting that are sediment and temperature. And as you know, that portion of the river got totally hammered by Irene. So the poor riparian condition is no surprise at this point. So the biological monitoring that we do, you can find it on what's called the ANR Natural Resources Atlas, which if you just Google Vermont ANR Atlas, it will come up. And this symbol is what you would find if you click on the right layer, the water quality layer. And you can see that we have these monitoring stations all along the river. This is Grafton Village. And it's got 4 sections. So we do fish community monitoring, we do bugs, we do chemistry, and we do habitat. And the darker the green, the image for the bugs and the fish, the better the water quality. The more towards the red end of the scale, the more questionable the water quality and the conditions. So you can find all this information on our atlas. The good things that are revealed are that the upper Saxtons River, this section up here of the main stem of the Saxtons, already meets what we have. We have 3 classes of water that apply to rivers and streams, A1, B1, and B2. And B1 is new. We haven't had that class for very long. And the upper Saxtons River already meets the criteria we have for B1. So it is a candidate for reclassification up from B2 to B1, which is a higher class and more protective of the high water quality that already exists there. Howe Brook, which is one of the ones that comes off Glebe down into the south branch of the Saxtons, already meets A1, but we've only done a minimal amount of monitoring there. We just started that recently. So we need some more to confirm that that is the case, but that actually already meets A1 conditions. And then Bull Creek, as I said, Bull Creek also already meets A1 conditions. So that's in excellent shape, which is very cool. One of the reasons for that good water quality is how much forest cover the Saxtons River watershed has. It's actually pretty amazing. The light green is general forest cover. The darker green is publicly owned forests, state, federal, and municipal town forests. And then the orange is all the forest land, private forest land that is protected as forest land under the current use program or the use value program. So when you look at the Saxtons River, out of the about 50,000 acres in the watershed, 45,000 of those acres are in forest cover, which is 90% of the watershed. And that is, forest cover is the most protective of water quality that we can have. The forest filters the forest floor, and the forest conditions filter the water. They provide excellent water quality downstream. So the Saxtons River, from that perspective, is in really great shape. Oh, there it is. How very odd. Sorry, my 2 screens are not lighting up, so you're going to have to give me a second here. Here we go. There are some things going on in the watershed. There's actually, it's pretty amazing that we only have 6 mapped dams. That doesn't mean there's only 6 dams in the watershed. We've got lots of dams that we don't know about, but the ones that we do know about, the 2 orange ones, Blake Higgins and the Cambridgeport Dam, where that old mill was, those are already breached, so they're already gone. And the green ones, Athens, Holbrook, Lawrence Four Corners, and Ham Mine, are all low hazard dams. And that doesn't mean, you know, there's nothing going on. That just means that if they were to breach, it's unlikely that, you know, life or property would be threatened by those. So the watershed has few dams, and a third of them that we know about have already been breached, which is great. Part of the basin plan will talk about removal of dams to open up fish passage and aquatic organism passage and allow sediment to transport downstream more naturally. So that will, the dams are a big part of watershed restoration.
Marie, while we're talking about dams, Ron had a question about the Blake Higgins Dam, and he's wanting to confirm that it's still, even though it's breached, a fish passage barrier.
To my understanding, it still is. After recent conversations, and Ron did some background work into looking at that dam, I'm going to check with the fisheries biologist to ask her to go out and look at it and confirm that it is still a passage blockage, because I believe it is. There's a lot of concrete that's still there. And so I'm going to ask her to take a look at that.
And Jay also was wondering the same thing about the Cambridgeport Dam.
You know, I am actually, I do not have eyes on the Cambridgeport Dam, so I don't know what that one looked like. So if anybody's out there and can send me a picture, I would love to know more about what that one looks like, because I don't know if that's a passage issue or not.
And there is a question about the sewage treatment plant. You had mentioned, you know, waters up to the sewage treatment plant in Saxtons River,
Yeah.
and that there is a new plant going in Saxtons River, and whether the new sewage treatment plant would be any better at phosphorus removal than what it just replaced.
It should be. That is part of the process, is to cut down on those nutrient inputs from wastewater treatment plants. So I know they're the new design, and I looked at this several years ago, and I haven't gotten to that part of the plan yet, so I haven't updated my information. But I had looked at what the new design was, and it should significantly improve phosphorus discharges into the river. Thank you. One thing that could be improved by the towns in the Saxtons River watershed is completing their municipal road erosion inventories. You can see that some towns have completed those. These are now required under the new road regulations, that water quality regulations that roads now have to meet. However, the towns in this particular watershed, they either haven't gotten to it yet, or the data hasn't made its way into the database yet, which is quite likely. It's quite a process to document every 100 feet of road that the town has assessed. So that process takes some time. But if your town hasn't quite gotten to that yet, it would be great to get the towns to complete those inventories and give us that data. Then we know better where to focus the funding for those clean water road projects as well. And the stuff that the water quality monitoring tells us needs to be improved, and where we should be doing restoration, we have different classes of impairments. So if it's yellow, like these out here, that means those waters do not meet Vermont water quality standards, and they are called impaired waters. So we have total maximum daily loads, which I'm sure you have probably heard about from Lake Champlain, and phosphorus in Lake Champlain. We have those same issues here. So if it's a yellow one, which we don't actually have any fully impaired waters in the Saxtons River, which is great, and no TMDLs. We don't have any lakes with invasive species in them. The Connecticut River itself through here is impaired for flow, but again, there are some things we can't do anything about because we can't control all the dams that run along the Connecticut River. So that is kind of a separate piece and process. The orange ones are called stressed waters, and these are still meeting water quality standards, but just barely. So we want to focus on those and do some restoration work so they don't fall below the criteria of meeting water quality standards. Because if that were to happen and the water to become degraded enough to be classified as impaired, then we do get into that whole TMDL process, which is a federal EPA, lots and lots of restrictions on what you can and cannot do. So if we can focus on these particular waters and make some improvements, get them to be clearly above the good water quality line, then we will make all our lives easier going forward and restore things that really do need to be taken care of. So Athens Pond is part of that, and that is one of those things that we can't really do much about. That's from acid rain. So over time, that is improving because Midwestern emissions have been cut down. So it's getting better. Again, the lower Saxtons has those issues of sediment and temperature I've already mentioned.
Marie, we had a question from Tatiana. What are 22 and 25, and what do the black marks indicate?
So 22 and 25 are not in the Saxtons River watershed. So the only ones that are 17 and 18. So this, well, I got to figure out what's what. So this is down here. That is little pond at the very south end of Athens. I can't even remember its name. So that's another acid lake. And this also, this is Minard's Pond in Rockingham. No, that's not. What's, okay, got Westminster folks. What's the little pond in Westminster right by the water? Anybody knows that? I have to go to a different database and look it up because I only noted the ones on the Saxtons River Watershed. I should know every one of these, but I honestly do not.
That's not the pond at Allen Brothers, is it?
I suppose it could be. I think that might be farther south though. I think that's farther down here. I'll look it up when we're done.
Okay.
Hi, Corey. One thing that I find really interesting, so as Lake Champlain has the phosphorus TMDL, the Connecticut River has a nitrogen TMDL. Same thing, same issues, just doesn't get as much attention as Lake Champlain does. So we need to work on nitrogen, and they're both nutrients, just like you throw them on your garden, they make plants grow. They do that in the water as well. And so modeling data that we have from state and federal monitoring sources have been put together to create these maps on these really small watershed piece layers or levels. And what this is telling us from the modeling is that fertilizer, manure, and crops are, you know, contributing some, but it's all in this upper kind of greenish yellow, pretty low numbers. Urban sources of runoff, which you would think, you know, Bellows Falls, some of Westminster, Brattleboro would be contributing significant amounts, is again in that upper fairly low discharge category. What we are seeing is septic systems. So all the individual residential septic systems are actually contributing more nitrogen to our watersheds than the other sources, which I found actually pretty surprising. So that is certainly going to be something that I try to highlight in this basin plan. Perhaps we need to be looking at the aging out of septic systems and septic system maintenance and things like that, that might be able to cut back on some of this discharge that's happening. We also get a lot of data, and some of you are very familiar with this, from volunteers. The Southeastern Vermont Watershed Alliance covers the Saxtons River and actually the entire Basin 11 area with monitoring all summer long, every other week. They're out testing bacteria levels. Usually this year with COVID budget cuts, a lot of this did not happen. But for the most part, most years, they're out testing nitrogen and phosphorus and bacteria and reporting that back. And a lot of these numbers and data that we rely on comes from a partnership between local watershed groups like SEVWA and the state La Rosa Partnership Program. So the volunteers go out and they collect the water samples that get shipped to certified labs, the state lab, as well as the lab run by the Connecticut River Conservancy down in Greenfield, Mass, to provide us with all that data. And I just want to put out a big thank you for all of you who do that for us. It is a huge piece of data that we really rely on. We also do physical assessments of the watersheds, which are called geomorphic assessments. So we have done the yellow lines are the ones that have the most data. All those yellow lines in the Saxtons River there, someone has walked the river piece from top to bottom and assessed what is going on with the physical conditions, the erosion, where are stormwater discharges coming in, what physical impacts are being seen and reflected, and what we can do about them. These feed river corridor plans, and I'll see if this actually works. We'll see if this works. So these feed what we call river corridor plans. This is just too much. There we go.
So Marie, because you're sharing the PowerPoint and you shared that particular screen, we're not able to see any links that you click.
Ah, never mind then. Thank you for that. I tried. I'm still getting used to this new format as well. So there is a Saxtons River Corridor Plan, which lays out a number of projects on what we can do to improve those conditions. And those are all documented on our database, which I will show you momentarily. We also have done stormwater mapping in Grafton, Rockingham, and Westminster, and these are little pieces of that mapping. So someone has gone out and looked down every single storm drain in Bellows Falls and Grafton and Westminster, and said that this storm drain connects underground to that storm drain, and that one connects to the next one, and that comes out into the river right over here. So we can track all that and then test the water that's coming out of that outfall to see if there's anything in there that we need to be concerned about. And again, that leads to projects both on a municipal level and on a state level, and then sometimes on a private level of fixes that need to be made, discharges into the stormwater system that shouldn't be there. We have very old villages, and underground piping goes, most people have no idea where their piping goes underground, and towns didn't either, which is what prompted this study. So we now have that data, and towns use it to maintain and improve their stormwater systems, as well as separate out connections that should be going to wastewater treatment that are still connected to stormwater. So we cut down on all those direct discharges that nobody knows they even have. And then this is where all those projects go. We do project identification and implementation, and all those projects go into the Watershed Projects database. And this is the Clean Water Project Explorer, is an online available mapping tool that you can click on any one of these buttons in the Saxtons River and see what that project is, see what project has been identified. And again, the green ones are natural resource projects. The orange ones are some sort of developed land, which usually means it's a stormwater issue. I don't even see any agricultural projects that have been identified. And then there's wastewater treatment, which has not yet made it, wastewater hasn't quite made it into this online feature yet. So all these things, I think the blue ones are often hazard mitigation, kind of post-Irene issues or things that were revealed in Irene that can be improved for flood mitigation, future flood mitigation. So going forward, we have done the monitoring, we have done the assessment work. I am now creating the tactical basin plan and starting to write that plan. So why we're here is for you to tell me what you want me to put in it. We have those land use sectors, the agriculture, the natural resources, the developed lands, the roads. Are there issues that you see in the Saxtons River, because you have closer eyes on it than I ever will, that you would like to see addressed in this plan? Where is the good stuff, the stuff you would like us to protect, for the uses of swimming, boating, fishing, drinking water supply, all those things that we enjoy and make use of for our rivers? What do you want to see in the basin plan to restore those areas, to protect those areas? And I'm here to listen and hear what you want me to put in. And if you have any questions, please go for it at this point.
So Marie, it might be helpful if we're done with the slide presentation to take it off of share screen so that we can see if anyone is raising their hand. So we have a small enough group that if people want to jump in when there's a quiet spot, please do so, or you can continue to type into the chat. I noticed we do have a question from Ron in the chat and says, what about water withdrawals? Thank you, especially during severe drought years.
I will say we. I'm trying to get my computer to work here. Water withdrawals are small ones for agriculture, for the most part, are minimally regulated unless they're large. We have standards that are very cryptic, and no one outside of 7Q10 world knows what they actually mean. But you cannot withdraw amounts of water that will basically take the water level of the river down below what would be drought conditions. So these low water levels are so low that I would doubt that if anyone were to apply for a withdrawal permit, it would get denied at this point. That doesn't mean it's not happening out there, because we don't have a permit program for water withdrawals except for hydroelectric plants and dams and those larger withdrawals that have to keep a minimum flow in the river. So it's a very tough question. In these flows, if there is a water withdrawal happening and it looks like it's so low that it would be impacting the aquatic community, we should be notified of that, so folks can take a look at it and determine whether that's going to be negatively impacting the aquatic community. That's the best I can do on that one, because we don't have a set permit program for that. I'm going to do some typing here while we talk.
Lisa?
Hi, Marie. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So at one point, I remember there was some discussion that the state was going to look into reclassifying the Willie, Howe, and Stiles.
Yep.
As A1. Is that the correct highest category?
Yep.
Clean water. I'm just wondering where that stands now.
So we have, I don't know when you tuned in, Lisa, but we have data on how.
Yeah, sorry, I was actually late, so yeah.
Okay, no problem. We have the data on how, Brooke, that is currently meeting A1. But we need a second set of data. We always have to have 2 data sets before we can reclassify. They haven't gotten to Willie and Stiles, so those are still on the list to do. So once we have that second set of data, which should be coming around in 2 seasons, they'll get back to, that's when we start all over again for the monitoring end of it. So once we have that second set of data on how we can move ahead with a petition to reclassify that to A1.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Looks like Peter, I think, was next, and then Camilla. And it would be helpful, we may not have a chance, or depending on timing, to go around robin and introduce everyone, but if you're asking a question or making a comment and want to share something, if you could just introduce yourself really briefly so that others in the group know which community you're from or which organization you're representing. Thank you. So Peter?
You're not coming through. I don't see a mute, but you're not coming through.
Yeah, I have two mute buttons just in case. I'm Peter Bergstrom, and I live in Saxtons River. I'm on the Watershed Collaborative, representing Rockingham through the Rockingham Conservation Commission. I'm also a Sevwan monitor, and I had heard that the Basin Farm, the 12 tribes, had a permit for hydropower at Twin Falls. Have you heard anything about that lately?
I have heard nothing about that in a number of years now. They had been interested, and a bunch of site visits had happened, but to my knowledge, an application is still not submitted for that. So I have not heard anything in at least 3 or 4 years. Okay,
does the permit expire at some point?
I think they can submit a permit for hydro to, it's to the Public Service Department.
Oh.
Rather than DEC. So that's how it goes through.
Okay.
And to my knowledge, a permit application has not been submitted.
Thanks.
Camilla, I think you were next, and then I have a question from Jennifer on the chat.
Yes. I'm Camilla Robertson, a property owner, my husband and I, along both sides of the Saxtons River near Cambridgeport. And our property is very much of lots of floodplain happening and so forth. But what the amount of knotweed on our property and up and down the whole river, until you get into the farther reaches of, small tributaries and stuff, is very difficult. And it seems, you would know better than me, but is that as damaging to the biota and the water quality and everything as it seems? And is there any chance of we've been fighting it here, Silas has been working on it, it's kind of hopeless, but I wonder what you can tell us about it.
Knotweed is one of those horrifying introduced plants. Its natural habitat is like lava flows in Japan. So it grows up through lava fields. It's crazy. It grows up through your tar driveway and road. It'll grow up through your foundation. It's tenacious, and it was brought in as either an ornamental, bees tend to love the flowers, which are late in the summer. And it is everywhere. I swear Saxtons River Watershed is like ground zero for knotweed and has been forever. It's certainly one of the first places I became aware of this stuff. There are all kinds of attempts to control it. And the more recent one is to put like 1/2 inch, the screening, not chicken wire, but the little square screening cubes.
Like a hardware cloth.
Thank you. I don't know what it's called. The little squares, 1/2 inch ones, and lay that down about 4 to 6 inches above the ground and let it come up And as it grows up, it keeps cutting itself off, and it grows up again and it cuts itself off. So that's one of the newer strategies that seems to be working. You would probably need a lot of it on your particular piece of property. Other than that, for larger, infestations, it is herbicide, because unless you have the ability to mow it for every month for the next 5 or 6 years. And each time you mow it back, if you let it grow a foot or so, and it, pulls nutrients out of its root system, and you cut it off, and so it's constantly pulling nutrients out of the ground until eventually it deprives that there's no more nutrients left to use. But even in my own experience, in a little patch in my own previous yard, I was there for 6 years, and it was down to, tiny pencil thin, and we sold the house. I went back 2 years later, and there was a huge patch again.
I guess partly I wonder how much of a detrimental impact it actually has. That's one of my biggest questions. I know how hard it is to fight it, but I wonder how much, in a way, how worth it is to do that fight.
It is detrimental. As you know, I'm sure, the root system is very thick, and it has big nodes along it. And so unlike ferns and goldenrod and everything else that should be growing up in those areas that have very fibrous roots and hold the soil together when it floods, or, as the rainwater passes over it, those root systems hold the soil together. Knotweed doesn't do that because it's got these big, thick roots, and it just doesn't form a net. So that's one of the impacts. It shades out, it grows very quickly. It'll grow, you can watch it grow inches in a day in the springtime, and it comes up before all the other native plants. So it's already up and leafed out before the natives come out of the ground. So it shades them out and kills off our native plants. And one of the crazy aquatic effects of that is that insects eat our native plants, right? They are accustomed to that. They're adapted to eat goldenrod and maple leaves and all the things that generally grow on our shorelines. They do not eat knotweed. So the amount, and this is documented, that the fish grow less in rivers that are covered with knotweed because the bugs are not falling into the river, providing the fish with food. So it's everything is connected to everything. It really is. So, the impacts of knotweed are actually pretty far reaching and convoluted. So yeah, it does have some pretty significant environmental impacts.
So Marie, is sort of a follow-up or adjacent question to this. Jennifer, who lives in Saxtons River, she's one of the several water quality monitoring volunteers. And she wondered about, is riparian vegetation part of the plan, specifically removing knotweed and restoring native plantings along the Saxtons River and tributaries?
Yes, it will be. And I will make sure I highlight that. Obviously, that's important. I will make a note of that. Yes, I mean, the riparian areas, and again, especially in that lower section of the Saxtons River where it was so heavily mangled and all the trees got wiped out in Irene, there's a lot of need for that. And the first thing that popped back up in those areas was the knotweed, because it just, little tiny piece of it carried downstream in Irene was replanted all along the river. So it only exacerbated an already bad problem. So yes, and when we have properties, Corey Ross is the Conservation District Manager, and we fund programs for buffer revegetation. And usually through those projects, we often do invasives control or knotweed control, because it doesn't make any sense to plant a short tree that's just going to immediately get shaded out by the first growth of knotweed. So we often do invasives control first and then wait a little while and then put the plants in. Ron Rhodes, who's also on here, does a lot of buffer plantings. So there are resources for folks to get trees and free trees, and several different programs that we can fund to make sure those riparian buffers get into the ground. We just need willing landowners to do it and to be willing to let those plants get put in on their shorelines.
I also wanted to point out that there is a new organization that has just formed in southeastern Vermont called the Southeastern Vermont SISMA, Cooperative Invasive Species Management Association. And this group is actually, it's made up of organizations such as the Vermont Land Trust, the Conservation District. We have private consulting foresters. There's many different organizations and people that are part of the steering committee. And the first thing that they are working on is currently offering every 2 weeks a webinar series on invasive species. And Corey, maybe you could put in the chat the link. If you go to the Wyndham Conservation District's website, there is a page for the Southeastern Vermont SISMA. That's with a C, SISMA. And you can see all the upcoming webinars that are being hosted and put on by the SISMA. And some of these topics that are being asked, and especially about knotweed and things like that. And there's other invasives that are heavily impacting our areas, will be addressed in some of those upcoming webinars. Thank you for putting that in the chat, Corey. So he put the link to the SISMA page at the Conservation District website. So we have a few more minutes.
I'd like to say something.
Oh, yes, Tatiana, great.
I'm with the Westminster Conservation Commission, which is kind of small right now, so we're not able to do a lot, but we have been working on, our big concern of ours has been flood resiliency issues. And one of the things that we're particularly interested in is, you were saying, or Marie was saying about the importance of the upland forests and keeping the forests intact. And it's great that we have so much forest, but I think what I'd like to see in the plan is a real emphasis on that, and guidelines. I don't know how to, one thing we've talked about is how do you provide guidelines to homeowners and people. They may not be in current use already, but they may not realize the importance of keeping their forested land intact and how important that is for water quality. So, something in the plan that would help people understand the damage that is done if they clear land or, putting in roads or whatever they do on their land, putting in, impervious surfaces and that sort of thing. So that's one concern we have. And I guess we're also interested in riparian areas and also along agricultural fields, how to encourage or support farmers who want to put in more, like buffer plantings. And I guess just providing some kind of educational resources to help people realize that they can do a lot with edible plants or crop plants in these buffer areas, so they don't have to be totally losing the crop value. They can plant hazelnuts and various things can do well in those buffer areas. And I just wanted to say one more thing, which is I also work with the Rich Earth Institute in Brattleboro that does the urine recycling. And so Marie mentioned the importance of the septic systems. And so urine, it is a big portion of what goes into septic systems, and it has a high amount of nitrogen and phosphorus. And so I don't know if there's a possibility to put into these plans something concerning support for alternative alternative systems for diverting urine from these septic systems.
I certainly can. Those are great. Thank you. I have just recorded all 3 of those. Thank you.
Okay. I was also curious, I saw the question in the chat about how the planting had done. Because one thing I also want to just say is that we are, in the Westminster Conservation Commission, we're very interested in promoting non-chemical means of addressing problematic species, and replacing them with the native species very quickly, and not, or not necessarily native species, but the species that will not be problematic. I know that was done in that planting that was mentioned, and so I was curious how that worked out. So I see Peter has a comment about it.
I can't see the chat myself, so.
Yeah.
It says, I have not checked their survival this year. We'll try to do so soon.
So there was this conversation, if you all noticed in the chat, about buffer plantings that specifically have gone in on properties that were FEMA buyout properties after Tropical Storm Irene. We've had the Saxtons River Watershed Collaborative, along with partners that are part of the collaborative, worked on various buffer plantings on some of these FEMA buyout properties. To my knowledge, I think there were at least 2 in Rockingham along Route 121. That one close to the bridge with North Westminster, going into the bends there of North Westminster. And the other one about halfway between Saxtons River and Bellows Falls along Saxtons River, where there were some houses that got taken out during Irene. And then the most recent one is on a parcel in Grafton that just got planted in the spring of 2019. And that parcel was on a FEMA buyout property where a garage business was wiped out during Irene. So we have had several plantings. Now the difficulty with plantings is the survival rate of new plants going into these plantings. You're not looking at 100% survival. And so you do definitely see a lot of die-off of new plants going into plantings. Years like this one, where we have significant droughts, you are seeing even more dieback. So one of the things that would be of help and looking into the future, and possibly a future project, is going back to some of these planting sites to look at survival rate, and looking at, have invasives now taken over parts of those sites? What are the current statuses, and do we need to do something additional to help support these buffer plantings going in?
Margot?
Yes.
I could add a little bit. The one by I-91 wasn't a FEMA buyout. It's a field that belongs to Harold Buckner. And that one has been mowed, and at least as well as I can see from the road, they did mow around at least some of the trees. The one in Rockingham near Ski Bowl Road, we haven't done any mowing or cutting of invasives at all, so it's going to be challenging just to get in there. But I will try to get in there this fall. Every time I drive by them, I think, hey, I should go look at those. But yeah, we tried to water both of them in 2016 when they were planted. And actually, Russ Hodgkins in Westminster was great. He just ordered up a town water truck and said, go water the trees. It's like, okay. That worked. In Rockingham, a friend of Devin Smith's had a gas pump, and we pumped some water from the river. But
Camilla, I think you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I just, maybe the group isn't aware that on both sides of the Saxtons River on our property, we've done a considerable number of all kinds of planting with NRCS support. And most of those are, there's definitely some loss, and we replaced some things, but there's more buffer there than there used to be. Seems to be doing okay.
That's great. Bill, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Marie, what Tatiana said about the importance of educating the public. I think there's a fair amount of evidence that because of the pandemic, we're seeing more people from out of state move into Vermont. And, you know, I'm not sure that folks that come from maybe more urban or suburban areas are quite as aware as they might be of the importance of maintaining forests and forest blocks. And also, you know, one of the things we've revised our zoning in Wyndham, and we've made a special effort to protect high elevation resource areas, which is of course where the headwaters of some of these streams are. But it's occurred to me as I'm the head of the Planning Commission that people that do the planning know what's in the zoning, but a lot of people, other people don't. I mean, zoning is complicated and the zoning regulations are long and dense, and most people aren't going to sit around and read them. So we've tried to create a sort of summary of our zoning regulations and do some things to publicize to folks what's in there, especially about prohibitions against development in high elevation areas and forest block areas. So any ideas that folks have about how to sort of share the information with a wider audience, I think is important to consider.
A really good point. I'm working on another committee that's talking a lot about climate migration and COVID migration into northern New England, and what impacts that's going to have on our local resources, on our local municipal services, on our, you know, fragmentation of our forests and stuff like that. I think that is very much a coming issue that we're all going to be having to deal with, and zoning is going to be a big piece of that.
Marie, there's Peter, go ahead and then I'll share what's in the chat.
Okay. You mentioned that septic systems are a major source in the Saxtons River. Is that of nitrogen?
Yes.
Yeah. Are there any state programs to pay for sewage upgrades? I mean, I worked for 24 years in the Chesapeake Bay restoration, and there were state funds for upgrades. I mean, can people, if they have failing septics, is there any help?
There are low to no interest loans for private systems that can be had through the state. Obviously, it's income level based. There are a number of programs which I will certainly lay out in the plan for communities to at least do kind of feasibility studies and look at the need for municipal wastewater in the villages. A lot of our villages, and quite a number in the Basin 11 West William Saxtons, are of course right on the river with tiny little house lots that don't really have room for septic systems, and heaven forbid they need a replacement septic system. So in my own town, which isn't in Basin 11, where I'm trying to get my own town to do that. They're called planning advance grants. And the state will come in and provide the town with funding to hire a consultant to do an overview of the town. What would make sense? Is it needed? Is it wastewater or drinking water that makes the most sense? Because a lot of very small village lots have their wastewater system and their well within feet of each other. So cross-contamination can be significant.
Yeah,
so those programs are available, not, you know, like, as I said, for septic systems, individual septic systems, it's an income-based program.
Yeah, I think in Saxtons River, we got one of those grants for planning our new wastewater plant, and we considered pumping the sewage to Bellows Falls through North Westminster, and it was cheaper, we thought, to build our own plant. But
so I can definitely highlight that.
So Marie, while you're typing there, then Ron asked if you could please share the study regarding less bugs for fish due to knotweed.
Ptolemy's book, Tollamy. I can send, I'll have to look it up, but I can send out that reference. It's a great book. It's fascinating to read. It's a whole book on invasives. And it's actually a good read.
So Tatiana wrote 2 different messages. She was responding to Bill's comments about people who have moved here, not necessarily knowing sort of forest management and maybe some best practices. And Tatiana said even people who have lived here a long time seem to take the forests for granted. She also commented that according to the Rich Earth Institute numbers, urine makes up about 75% of the nitrogen and 55% of the phosphorus in municipal wastewater. She doesn't know how that compares to the amounts in wastewater going into septic systems, but urine diversion systems can be an alternative. Keeping these nutrients out of the waterways, of course, is then land applied in some ways, so that has to be carefully done. Mike from the Rockingham Conservation asked, do the basin plan contents help bring funding to the table for projects directly or indirectly? What's the best way to leverage that?
They directly influence funding for on-the-ground projects. Any project that is being proposed for our state clean water funding basically I have to input that into the database for this watershed so that I am aware of what is being proposed. Those projects get vetted through several layers and put into the watershed projects database. But if they make it into the database, that means that state funding is available for that project. All our state funding is competitive, so that doesn't mean every project is going to get funded, but the ones that rise to the top, certainly, the projects in the river corridor plans and the basin plans, and if I know the project that you're looking at, I can take it through this basin plan and make sure it gets into the watershed projects database. So yes, that is the major impact of tactical basin plans, is that these are the documents that prioritize funding for implementation projects. So if you have a project, tell me now, send it to me in an email. The more information you can provide, the better. Every project, as you can see on that Project Explorer that I showed, each project has a dot. So I need to know where it is. I need to know if it's a natural resource project or a road project, all those things. And Margot and Corey are in charge of a lot of that development. They have a spreadsheet that they can fill in with all the projects that are expressed and desired. And then they give me that spreadsheet and it gets reviewed, and that's how it gets into the database. So you can send projects to any one of the 3 of us, Margot, Corey, or myself.
I just want to mention, Marie, that what happens after the every 5 years, a new tactical basin plan is updated. So there will be an updated version for the Saxtons River Watershed and the West and the Williams. We're all in one basin. And then in the intervening years between the basin plans, organizations such as Wyndham Regional or the Connecticut River Conservancy, or where Corey is at the Conservation District, those lists of projects are what these organizations go to help address. And that's where they say, hey, we're noticing that this is in the basin plan. This is a high priority project that was identified by the communities in that watershed, and they work on trying to bring funding to do that project. And one of the things that is helpful to organizations like ours is that unless you make noise about projects, they might not get addressed. If we know that we have, as an organization, like that helps manage these projects and trying to get them done, if there's a group like a conservation commission or the landowners that are saying, hey, this is a real problem and a priority, we should try to work on this, that's what's going to get the attention of groups that are trying to address the projects, because there are so many projects all over southeastern Vermont, all over the state, that by making a little bit of noise is how, and knowing that there's community support to getting those projects done, that goes a long way in helping get those projects recognized and worked on.
That's such a key point, because I think the biggest obstacle to getting anything done is getting somebody to say, I want the project done. If we don't know a landowner wants to do something, we can't help them. So the more the word gets out that this funding is available, it's available for public lands, it's available for private lands. If we have willing landowners, that jumps right to the top of the to-do list.
So in the chat, there was some questions about the Douglas Ptolemy book that you mentioned,
Yeah.
Bringing Nature Home. And
Thank you.
Tatiana has the book in front of her, and she says that she's not clear what study he's referring to concerning insects and Japanese knotweed. He seems to refer to many other plants, but she doesn't see a study specifically about Japanese knotweed and its value or lack of value to insects.
I don't have the book in front of me. I know it's in there, and I know that's where I read it, and where I learned about it. So, and I read the book probably 5 years ago. So, I'd have to really plow through it again. So sorry, I can't give you a close reference on that one.
So are there any other questions for Marie this evening, or any ideas that people want to share about concerns they have along the Saxtons River watershed, or areas that are really special that we should be paying attention to for preservation? Mike just mentioned from Rockingham Conservation Commission, there was an effort a few years ago to control the bank erosion at the Basin Farm. Where does that stand?
It stands with the landowners. As I said, when we have willing landowners, we're there. And the folks at the farm have been approached numerous times, but have not come forward to say they actually would like to do that project. So we can't work, these are not mandated programs. We can't force anybody to do these projects. So the landowner being willing is the first step in getting anything done, but we can't do anything if they don't invite us to the table.
And he said, despite being so forested, the Saxtons River, sounds like it's a different topic. Despite being so forested, the Saxtons River is very flashy. Is that natural to this river, or what should be done to reduce that?
Yes, it is very flashy. Part of it is just the general shape of the basin. It has a main stem, that is fed by a lot of tributaries that come off very steep slopes. So anything that happens on those hillsides comes plowing down into the valley, and hits the larger, the south branch and the main stem. So that in itself, and none of those tributaries are very long. So the water moves, if you have a round basin, it's less flashy because those tributaries are longer and it takes that water varying times to reach the main stem. The Saxtons is kind of a long, narrow watershed, very steep, and the tributaries aren't really very long. So all that water hits the main stem together, which makes it, the levels go up and down really fast. That's kind of the physical characteristic of it being flashy. There's, because it's so steep, other than like the south branch and the main stem, there's not a lot of place for the water to, in those smaller tributaries, to spread out and retain on the land before it comes down. So as with any kind of flooding issue, the more we can provide those floodplain areas, even if they're like pocket parks, small areas where we reconnect the floodplain. And one of the issues that I have seen in the Saxtons River is berming. And there was a lot of berming after Irene, where the big machine went down the river and just put big berms along the stream banks and the river. And that makes the flashiness even worse, because that water can now not access the floodplain where it should be able to spread out, because those berms are holding it in the channel, making it go downstream even faster. So if you know of areas that we can't see from the road, and I don't know that there's a berm there, then we should take it out. So identifying those locations of berms that went in after Irene, some of them went in after the 70s floods, that really should come out and allow the stream and the river to overflow onto land that is just floodplain forest. That's what the floodplain forest is all about. So where we can take out those berms, where we know they are, those are great natural resource restoration projects. And that would definitely help with flashiness.
I just wanted to make a note that I put in the chat my email link. As I said, I am one of the steering committee members on the Saxtons River Watershed Collaborative, who is hosting this public meeting this evening. I also am with Windham Regional Commission, and I work with all of the different partners that are here in this meeting tonight, plus some others that do work in our watersheds. So if you do have questions or concerns, or you again, want to just share something that crossed your mind about things that are happening in our watershed that you either want to get an answer to or you feel like should be addressed in this tactical basin plan, please reach out to me and I can make sure that Marie or one of our partners gets the information and can follow up with you. So whether it's, hey, where a berm is, and we can find further information about that. Or as we mentioned really early on in this program, if somebody's walking the river and you happen to be up in the Cambridgeport area, you can get a picture of what the breached dam at Cambridgeport looks like. We don't have any current images of what that breached dam looks like. Peter, do you have?
Oh, I'm just going to mention, I looked up the dam location. It's right next to 121, so I should be able to stop by there, and may have to wait till the winter if there's a lot of vegetation.
That'd be great. And any other dams you find out there, I've only got 6 mapped. So if there's others out there that we don't know about, I'd love to learn about them. Ron would love to learn about
Yes, and we should point out that Ron, who is with the Connecticut River Conservancy, actually just did a very successful dam removal of a dam that was right in the Grafton Village, right, Ron?
Yep, Kidder Hill.
Yeah, so it was at the Kidder Hill Bridge area, and that was a very successful project. It was in the project database for the Saxtons River Watershed, and that's a great example of where one of the partnering organizations was able to see that, work with the landowners, and get that dam removed. So thank you all for coming this evening. This has been a really important information sharing and way to get feedback about what issues are really important to people all throughout the watershed. And again, I encourage you to reach out if you have further ideas, if you have questions, and you can do that through me, and I can get it again to the partners and to Marie at the state so that we can make sure that those things are getting followed up on. So I thank you for taking time this evening and joining us. We'll stay on for a few more minutes if anyone has any last minute questions or issues that they want to bring up. But I also wanted to be conscious of the time, and that, if you need to be moving on, please feel free to do so. And again, thank you for coming.